I never thought I'd be starting over at 71. Not after 4 decades of careful saving. Not after building a respected career as a hospital administrator. And certainly not after watching my son empty my entire retirement account of $347,000 for safekeeping. But here I am, sitting in my new apartment in Willow Springs, watching the sunrise over buildings I barely recognize, wondering how I went from being the financially secure mother everyone came to for help to someone my own son could so easily deceive. Someone he called confused and vulnerable when he thought I couldn't hear him. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. That morning in First National Bank still plays through my mind like a recurring nightmare. The sympathetic yet uncomfortable expression on the young banker's face as she informed me that my accounts had been emptied 3 weeks earlier. The cold panic rising in my chest as she showed me the transfer authorization with my signature. A signature I had no memory of providing. The disbelief when she gently explained that my son, Daniel, had processed the transaction, assuring the EAE staff that he was consolidating my finances to protect me from scammers targeting the elderly. I remember fumbling for my phone with trembling hands, the branch manager hovering nearby offering me water as I called Daniel. His voice, so casual, so normal when he answered. And then his explanation, delivered with practiced patience. "Mom, we discussed this. You've been getting confused lately. Remember those bills you paid twice? I moved your money somewhere safer until we set up a proper trust. It's all for your protection." But I wasn't confused. I had never been confused. And I had certainly never authorized him to take my life savings, money that represented decades of night shifts, careful budgeting, and postponed dreams. Money that was supposed to secure my independence until my final days. What Daniel didn't realize was that despite his frequent reminders about my declining memory, I had kept meticulous records my entire life. Hospital administration had taught me the importance of documentation, of backup systems, of verifying everything. Old habits die hard, even in retirement. And those habits would soon leave my son completely speechless. But before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow I've prepared something even more shocking that you won't want to miss. You see, I had spent my life being the reliable one, the steady one. I was Evelyn Mercer, the widow who had raised 2 children alone after my husband. Thomas died of a heart attack when our kids were just teenagers. The woman who worked 60-hour weeks to put both children through college without a penny of student debt. The mother who downsized from our family home to help Daniel with the down payment on his first house in Oak Ridge Heights. The grandmother who babysit my granddaughters Lily and Sophie every weekend so Daniel and his wife Rebecca could build their real estate business. My daughter Carolyn had moved to Phoenix years ago, building her own life as a university professor. We stayed close through weekly calls and annual visits, but the day-to-day responsibilities, the family dinners, the emergency childcare, the local family presence, that all fell to me. And I had embraced it wholeheartedly, finding purpose in being their safety net. After retiring at 68, I had settled into a comfortable routine in my condo at Lakeview Gardens. I volunteered at the hospital auxiliary 3 days a week, took watercolor classes on Thursdays, and hosted Sunday dinners for Daniel's family. My retirement accounts, combined with my pension and Social Security, provided more than enough for my modest needs and occasional luxuries. I had planned carefully for this chapter, determined to never become a burden to my children. The financial arrangement had been transparent and organized. My monthly expenses were automated through my checking account. My retirement savings were divided between a conservative portfolio and certificates of deposit that I monitored regularly. I had established a living trust years earlier, with clear provisions for both children and my 4 grandchildren. Everything was in order. Or so, I thought. The first subtle signs appeared about 6 months before that fateful day at the bank. Daniel began stopping by more frequently, often when I was paying bills or reviewing my investments. He started asking casual questions about my accounts, about whether I found managing my finances stressful at my age. He mentioned articles about elderly parents being scammed, about the importance of protecting assets before it was too late. "Mom, have you considered letting me help manage all this?" he asked one evening, gesturing to my neatly organized financial files. "It's a lot for you to keep track of on your own." I had smiled, touched by what I perceived as concern. "I've been managing these accounts since before you were born, Danny. I think I can handle it." He didn't push, not then. But the suggestions continued, becoming more frequent, more urgent. He began pointing out small errors, a misplaced receipt, a bill I'd set aside to verify a charge before paying. Normal, everyday occurrences that he framed as evidence of cognitive decline. And I began to wonder, was I slipping? Was I failing? To notice my own diminishing capabilities? The fear of losing independence, of becoming exactly what I had fought so hard not to be, a burden, made me vulnerable to his narrative. "Perhaps you're right," I conceded after he pointed out that I'd ordered the same book online twice in 1 month. Maybe I could use some help. That small concession was all he needed. Within weeks, he had scheduled a meeting with his financial advisor, arranged for me to sign medical proxies and powers of attorney, and begun the process of simplifying my finances. I agreed to let him set up online access to my accounts so he could keep an eye on things and help me avoid mistakes. I never agreed to the complete transfer of my funds. I never authorized emptying every account I owned. But somehow, it happened anyway. Standing in that bank, staring at the transfer records showing every penny I owned now sitting in accounts I couldn't access, I felt something break inside me. Not just trust in my son, but something deeper. Belief. In the family narrative I had constructed over decades of sacrifice and support. The story I had told myself about being valued, respected, essential. In that moment of clarity, as the branch manager asked if I wanted to file a fraud report against my own son, I made a decision that would change everything between us forever. What I did next left not just Daniel speechless, but everyone who thought they knew quiet, accommodating Evelyn Mercer. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you. So if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The branch manager at First National Bank, a compassionate woman named Marilyn with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck, guided me to a private conference room after seeing my distress. She brought me a cup of tea and closed the door to give me privacy as I processed what had happened. "Mrs. Mercer, take all the time you need," she said gently. "And please know that we have resources available if you decide to take action." Action. The word hung in the air between us. What action could I possibly take against my own son? The son I had raised alone after Thomas died of that sudden heart attack during a business trip to Cleveland. The son whose nightmares I had soothed, whose college applications I had proofread, whose wedding toast had brought tears to my eyes when he called me his rock and inspiration. My name is Evelyn Mercer, though most people call me Evie. For most of my adult life, I defined myself through service to others, as a mother who worked extra shifts to provide opportunities for her children, as a hospital administrator who ensured everything ran smoothly for patients and staff, as the family matriarch who hosted every holiday dinner and remembered every birthday without fail. People often described me as dependable, practical, and selfless, qualities I had cultivated out of necessity after becoming a widow at 42. Thomas and I hadn't been wealthy, but we had been comfortable. He worked as a civil engineer for the city, while I had built my career in hospital administration, starting as a clerk and working my way up to senior administrator at Pinecrest Medical Center. We had saved diligently, planning for a retirement, filled with travel and the leisure activities we had postponed during our working years. Then came that phone call in the middle of the night. Thomas, dead from a massive coronary while on a business trip. Just like that, our careful plans collapsed, and I found myself a single mother with a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son, a mortgage, and the weight of sole responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. I kept moving forward because I had no other choice. I took on administrative consulting work on weekends. I learned how to fix leaky faucets and negotiate car purchases and complete tax forms, all the tasks Thomas had handled. I attended every soccer game and dance recital I could, though sometimes work made that impossible. During those times, I wrote notes for Daniel and Carolyn, tucking them into their lunches or under their pillows, wanting them to know they were never far from my thoughts. Many well-meaning friends suggested I find someone new, as if a husband were simply an interchangeable part that could be replaced. But I never remarried. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just the reality of working 60-hour weeks while raising teenagers. Later, when the children were grown, I had become so fiercely independent, so accustomed to making my own decisions, that the idea of compromising seemed foreign. "You're intimidating," my friend Eleanor once told me over coffee. "Not in a bad way, but you've built this life completely on your own terms. Most men our age want someone who needs them more than you ever would." Perhaps she was right. I had learned to need no one, or so I thought. The truth was more complicated. I needed the identity I had created: the capable widow, the selfless mother, the indispensable grandmother. I needed to be needed. When Daniel married Rebecca right after college graduation, I was there with emotional and financial support. When they struggled to come up with a down payment for their first house, I sold the family home, the one with Thomas's height measurements for the children still penciled on the kitchen door frame, and downsized to a condo, giving them the difference. "Mom, we can't accept this," Daniel had protested, though not very convincingly. "Of course you can," I had insisted. "That house is too big for me anyway. And just think how much closer I'll be to help with the grandchildren when they come along." And come along they did. First Lily, now 12, with her grandfather's analytical mind and love of puzzles. Then Sophie, 9, artistic and dreamy, always lost in books or craft projects. I scheduled my retirement around their births, ensuring I would be available whenever needed. 3 days a week became my standard babysitting commitment, though in practice it was often more. Carolyn took a different path. After completing her doctorate in evolutionary biology, she accepted a position at Arizona State University, putting 2,000 miles between us. We maintained a close relationship despite the distance: weekly video calls, long email exchanges, annual visits in both directions. She worried about me doing too much for Daniel and his family, but I dismissed her concerns. "He needs the help more than you do," I would explain. "You've always been so independent, just like me." The truth, which I rarely acknowledged even to myself, was that I needed the role I played in Daniel's life far more than he actually needed my assistance. My identity had become so intertwined with being the person everyone relied on that I feared invisibility without it. Perhaps that's why I didn't see the warning signs sooner. It started with small things after my retirement. Daniel suggesting, I seemed tired when I forgot a minor detail about his work schedule. Rebecca mentioning to her friends, within my hearing, that I'd become a bit confused sometimes. Comments about how stressful it must be to manage my finances at my age. Then came the scattered photos on strategic occasions, me looking disoriented, after waking from a nap, caught mid-blink so my eyes appeared unfocused, captured from unflattering angles that emphasized my age, photos that would later help construct a narrative of decline. "Remember when you forgot Sophie's recital last month?" Daniel mentioned casually over dinner one Sunday. I hadn't forgotten. I had the date clearly marked on my calendar, but Daniel had texted that morning to say it was postponed due to the dance instructor's illness. When I mentioned this, he exchanged a look with Rebecca that made my stomach tighten. "Mom, that never happened," he said gently. "I didn't send any text like that." I checked my phone later that night. The text was gone. Had I imagined it? Had I somehow deleted it accidentally? For the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt about my own mind. That doubt was the first thread unraveling the confident identity I had spent decades constructing. If I couldn't trust my own memory, the tool that had allowed me to juggle complex hospital scheduling, family commitments, and community obligations without failure, who was I? The incidents multiplied. Bills I was certain I had paid that Daniel found, unmailed in my desk drawer. Appointments supposedly missed that I was sure had been scheduled for different days. Conversations I had no recollection of having. Each discrepancy was met with the same concerned expression, the same gentle tone suggesting worry rather than accusation. "It happens to everyone, Mom," Daniel would say, his hand covering mine reassuringly. "It's nothing to be ashamed of. But maybe it's time to think about simplifying your life. Let me help with the complicated stuff." The complicated stuff expanded gradually. First bill payments, then investment decisions, then medical appointments. Where Daniel would speak directly to the doctors while I sat silently beside him, increasingly uncertain of my place in my own life. When he suggested consolidating my finances for simplicity, it seemed like a reasonable next step in this new reality where my competence could no longer be taken for granted. I agreed to meet with his financial advisor, a sleek young man named Jason who spoke about asset protection and streamlined management, while looking at Daniel rather than me. What I didn't agree to, what I would never have agreed to, was the complete transfer of every cent I possessed into accounts I couldn't access independently. Sitting in that bank conference room, staring at the transfer records and listening to Marilyn explain my options, I felt something shift inside me. The identity I had clung to, reliable, capable, essential, had been systematically dismantled not by cognitive decline, but by those I trusted most. It was time to discover who Evelyn Mercer could be when she stopped defining herself through service to others, particularly to a son who had betrayed her most fundamental trust. Leaving the bank that day, I felt as though I were moving through a fog. Marilyn had given me her direct line and a folder of resources for elder financial abuse cases, but I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. The word abuse stuck in my throat. That was something that happened to other people, vulnerable people, isolated people, not to Evelyn Mercer, who had managed a hospital department with a 7-figure budget for 20 years. I didn't go directly home. I couldn't face my condo, with its carefully arranged photographs of Daniel and his family, the handmade cards from Lily and Sophie taped to my refrigerator, the calendar marked with my babysitting commitments. Instead, I drove to Lakeside Park, where Thomas and I used to take the children on Sunday afternoons. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching ducks cut gentle wakes across the surface while trying to make sense of my new reality. My phone rang repeatedly, Daniel, no doubt, wondering why I had visited the bank against his advice. I silenced it, needing time to think without his voice in my ear, telling me what I was feeling, what I was forgetting, who I was becoming. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the park, I made a decision. Before confronting Daniel, I needed to understand exactly what had happened, not just with my accounts, but with me. Had I truly been showing signs of confusion? Had I actually forgotten appointments, misplaced important documents, repeated myself in conversations? Or had I been manipulated into doubting my own competence? I drove to Pinecrest Medical Center, where I had worked for over 30 years before retiring. Dr. Helen Winters, the neurologist who had been a friendly colleague during my tenure, was still practicing. I hadn't scheduled an appointment, something the old Evelyn would never have considered acceptable, but I hoped our professional relationship might warrant an exception. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mercer, it's been ages. How have you been?" "I've been better, Tricia," I admitted. "Is Dr. Winters available by any chance? It's somewhat urgent." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Helen's office, explaining my situation. The missing money, yes, but more importantly, the questions about my cognitive function that had preceded it. "So you're here because you want me to evaluate you for early dementia?" Helen clarified, her expression neutral and professional despite our history. "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to know if there's actually something wrong with my memory or if I've been manipulated." Helen's assessment was thorough. Cognitive tests, neurological examination, detailed questions about my daily functioning and any changes I'd noticed. Myself. After 2 hours, she leaned back in her chair with a sigh. "Evelyn, I'm not seeing any significant cognitive impairment here. Your test results are entirely consistent with normal aging. Occasional word-finding difficulties, some minor, short-term memory lapses. Nothing that would interfere with financial decision-making or independent living." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a wave of anger so intense it left me lightheaded. "So there's nothing wrong with me?" "I didn't say that," Helen replied carefully. "What you're describing, the gaslighting, the financial control, the isolation from decision-making, that's elder abuse, Evelyn. It's a different kind of problem, but a very real one. Elder abuse. There was that term again, impossible to avoid now. I, who had implemented hospital protocols to identify and report such cases, had become a statistic. "What would you advise, professionally speaking?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. Helen didn't hesitate. "Document everything. Contact Adult Protective Services. Consider legal action to recover your assets. And most importantly, establish independence from your son." I nodded, thanking her for her time and directness. She scribbled a note on her prescription pad before I left. Not medication, but the name and number of a lawyer who specialized in elder law and financial recovery. "He's good, Evelyn, and he doesn't back down, even in family cases." It was nearly evening when I finally returned to Lakeview Gardens. My absence had not gone unnoticed. Daniel's car was parked in the visitor spot, and as I pulled in beside it, I could see him pacing, near the entrance to my building. When he spotted me, he rushed over, his face a mask of concern that I now recognized as entirely performative. "Mom, where have you been? I've been calling for hours. We were about to file a missing person report." The old Evelyn would have apologized, immediately would have explained herself, would have worked to ease his apparent distress. But I was no longer that woman. "I had errands to run, Daniel," I said calmly, retrieving my purse from the passenger seat. "I'm perfectly fine, as you can see." He followed me toward the building entrance, his voice taking on that patient tone I had come to despise. "Mom, you can't just disappear like that. Not in your condition. You need to let someone know where you're going." "My condition?" I stopped, turning to face him fully. "And what condition would that be exactly?" He faltered slightly, not expecting direct confrontation. "Your memory issues, the confusion you've been experiencing. We've discussed this." "Yes, we have. And it's interesting that no one but you and Rebecca seems to notice these supposed issues." I resumed walking, unwilling to have this conversation in the parking lot where neighbors might overhear. Inside my condo, Daniel continued his performance of concern, pacing my living room while texting someone, Rebecca, presumably, to report that I had been found. I sat in my favorite armchair, watching him with new clarity. This was my son, the little boy I had raised alone, the teenager whose college tuition I had scraped together through extra shifts and careful budgeting, the man whose children I had cared for without complaint. And he had stolen from me, not impulsively or in desperation, but methodically, deliberately, after months of careful groundwork. "Daniel," I said finally, interrupting his monologue about my concerning behavior. "I went to the bank today." He froze mid-step, his back to me. When he turned, his expression was carefully composed. "The bank? What for?" "I wanted to withdraw some cash for the week." Imagine my surprise when I discovered that all of my accounts, checking, savings, CDs, investment portfolio, have been emptied. "Not emptied, Mom," he corrected quickly, his tone reasonable. "Transferred, for protection. We discussed this." "Did we?" I kept my voice level. "I don't recall agreeing to transfer over $300,000 out of accounts in my name and into accounts I can't access." "That's exactly the problem," Daniel sighed, sitting on the sofa across from me. "These memory lapses. You don't remember our conversations about consolidating your finances, about the trust we're setting up, about protecting your assets from scammers who target seniors." I studied my son's face, the face I had memorized as an infant, had bandaged after childhood falls had watched mature into adulthood. When had he learned to lie so convincingly? Had that skill developed specifically to deceive me? Or had it always been there unnoticed? "I spoke with Dr. Winters today," I said, watching him carefully. "A full neurological workup. Would you like to know the results?" A flicker of alarm crossed his features before he controlled it. "You saw a doctor without telling me?" "Mom, we've talked about this. I need to be at your appointments to help you understand." "To control the narrative," I interrupted. "To make sure I don't hear directly that there's nothing wrong with my cognitive function. That I'm not experiencing any significant memory impairment or confusion beyond what's normal for my age." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned determination. "With all due respect to Dr. Winters," he said carefully, "one evaluation isn't definitive, and memory issues can be intermittent. You might be having a good day today, but that doesn't erase the concerns we've—" "The money, Daniel," I cut in, unwilling to let him redirect the conversation. "I want it returned to my accounts. All of it. By tomorrow." He exhaled slowly, adopting the patient expression I had seen so often lately. "Mom, that's not possible. The transfers are part of a larger financial restructuring. For your benefit, to protect you." "From what?" "The only threat to my financial security is sitting right in front of me." His expression hardened, the pretense of patience slipping. "That's unfair and, frankly, a little paranoid. This hostile attitude is exactly why we needed to secure your assets before you made impulsive decisions out of confusion." "Impulsive decisions like what? Spending my own money? Updating my will? Reducing your inheritance?" Daniel stood abruptly. "I think you're too upset to have a productive conversation right now. We can discuss this tomorrow when you're calmer. Rebecca and I are only trying to help you." As he moved toward the door, I remained seated, my voice following him. "If the money isn't back in my accounts by noon tomorrow, my next call will be to the police." He paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost contemptuous. "Do what you think is best, Mom. But remember, filing a false police report is a crime, and given your documented cognitive issues, I'm not sure anyone would take such accusations seriously." The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving me alone with the full understanding of what I was facing. My son hadn't just taken my money. He had systematically undermined my credibility, my autonomy, and my identity. Any action I might take would be filtered through the narrative he had carefully constructed. A confused elderly woman making unfounded accusations against the devoted son who was only trying to protect her. I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, the weight of this betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt truly alone, cut off from my financial resources, my family support system, and even my own sense of self. But something else was stirring beneath the shock and hurt. A slow-burning anger, a steely determination that had carried me through widowhood, single parenthood, and decades of professional challenges. Evelyn Mercer had never been a victim, and I wasn't about to start now. I reached for the folder Marilyn had given me at the bank and the card from Dr. Winters. It was time to fight back, not just for my money, but for my dignity, my independence, and my future. What I set in motion that night would shock everyone who thought they knew me, especially my son, who had gravely underestimated the woman who had raised him. Leaving the bank that day, I felt as though I were moving through a fog. Marilyn had given me her direct line and a folder of resources for elder financial abuse cases, but I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. The word abuse stuck in my throat. That was something that happened to other people, vulnerable people, isolated people. Not to Evelyn Mercer, who had managed a hospital department with a 7-figure budget for 20 years. I didn't go directly home. I couldn't face my condo, with its carefully arranged photographs of Daniel and his family, the handmade cards from Lily and Sophie taped to my refrigerator, the calendar marked with my babysitting commitments. Instead, I drove to Lakeside Park, where Thomas and I used to take the children on Sunday afternoons. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching ducks cut gentle wakes across the surface while trying to make sense of my new reality. My phone rang repeatedly. Daniel, no doubt, wondering why I had visited the bank against his advice. I silenced it, needing time to think without his voice in my ear, telling me what I was feeling, what I was forgetting, who I was becoming. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the park, I made a decision. Before confronting Daniel, I needed to understand exactly what had happened, not just with my accounts, but with me. Had I truly been showing signs of confusion? Had I actually forgotten appointments, misplaced important documents, repeated myself in conversations? Or had I been manipulated into doubting my own competence? I drove to Pinecrest Medical Center, where I had worked for over 30 years before retiring. Dr. Helen Winters, the neurologist who had been a friendly colleague during my tenure, was still practicing. I hadn't scheduled an appointment, something the old Evelyn would never have considered acceptable, but I hoped our professional relationship might warrant an exception. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mercer, it's been ages. How have you been?" "I've been better, Tricia," I admitted. "Is Dr. Winters available by any chance? It's somewhat urgent." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Helen's office explaining my situation. The missing money, yes, but more importantly, the questions about my cognitive function that had preceded it. "So you're here because you want me to evaluate you for early dementia?" Helen clarified, her expression neutral and professional despite our history. "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to know if there's actually something wrong with my memory or if I've been manipulated." Helen's assessment was thorough. Cognitive tests, neurological examination, detailed questions about my daily functioning, and any changes I'd noticed myself. After 2 hours, she leaned back in her chair with a sigh. "Evelyn, I'm not seeing any significant cognitive impairment here. Your test results are entirely consistent with normal aging, occasional word-finding difficulties, some minor short-term memory lapses, nothing that would interfere with financial decision-making or independent living." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a wave of anger so intense it left me lightheaded. "So there's nothing wrong with me?" "I didn't say that," Helen replied carefully. "What you're describing, the gaslighting, the financial control, the isolation from decision-making, that's elder abuse, Evelyn. It's a different kind of problem, but a very real one. Elder abuse. There was that term again, impossible to avoid now. I, who had implemented hospital protocols to identify and report such cases, had become a statistic. "What would you advise, professionally speaking?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. Helen didn't hesitate. "Document everything. Contact Adult Protective Services. Consider legal action to recover your assets. And most importantly, establish independence from your son." I nodded, thanking her for her time and directness. She scribbled a note on her prescription pad before I left. Not medication, but the name and number of a lawyer who specialized in elder law and financial recovery. "He's good, Evelyn, and he doesn't back down, even in family cases." It was nearly evening when I finally returned to Lakeview Gardens. My absence had not gone unnoticed. Daniel's car was parked in the visitor's spot, and as I pulled in beside it, I could see him pacing near the entrance to my building. When he spotted me, he rushed over, his face a mask of concern that I now recognized as entirely performative. "Mom, where have you been? I've been calling for hours. We were about to file a missing person report." The old Evelyn would have apologized, immediately would have explained herself, would have worked to ease his apparent distress. But I was no longer that woman. "I had errands to run, Daniel," I said calmly, retrieving my purse from the passenger seat. "I'm perfectly fine, as you can see." He followed me toward the building entrance, his voice taking on that patient tone I had come to despise. "Mom, you can't just disappear like that. Not in your condition. You need to let someone know where you're going." "My condition?" I stopped, turning to face him fully. "And what condition would that be exactly?" He faltered slightly, not expecting direct confrontation. "Your memory issues. The confusion you've been experiencing. We've discussed this." "Yes, we have. And it's interesting that no one but you and Rebecca seems to notice these supposed issues." I resumed walking, unwilling to have this conversation in the parking lot where neighbors might overhear. Inside my condo, Daniel continued his performance of concern, pacing my living room while texting someone, Rebecca presumably, to report that I had been found. I sat in my favorite armchair, watching him with new clarity. This was my son, the little boy I had raised alone, the teenager whose college tuition I had scraped together through extra shifts and careful budgeting, the man whose children I had cared for without complaint. And he had stolen from me, not impulsively or in desperation, but methodically, deliberately, after months of careful groundwork. "Daniel," I said finally, interrupting his monologue about my concerning behavior. "I went to the bank today." He froze mid-step, his back to me. When he turned, his expression was carefully composed. "The bank? What for?" "I wanted to withdraw some cash for the week." Imagine my surprise when I discovered that all of my accounts, checking, savings, CDs, investment portfolio, have been emptied. "Not emptied, Mom," he corrected quickly, his tone reasonable. "Transferred. For protection. We discussed this." "Did we?" I kept my voice level. "I don't recall agreeing to transfer over $300,000 out of accounts in my name and into accounts I can't access." "That's exactly the problem," Daniel sighed, sitting on the sofa across from me. "These memory lapses. You don't remember our conversations about consolidating your finances, about the trust we're setting up, about protecting your assets from scammers who target seniors." I studied my son's face, the face I had memorized as an infant, had bandaged after childhood falls, had watched mature into adulthood. When had he learned to lie so convincingly? Had that skill developed specifically to deceive me, or had it always been there, unnoticed? "I spoke with Dr. Winters today," I said, watching him carefully. "A full neurological workup. Would you like to know the results?" A flicker of alarm crossed his features before he controlled it. "You saw a doctor without telling me?" "Mom, we've talked about this. I need to be at your appointments to help you understand." To control the narrative, I interrupted. To make sure I don't hear directly that there's nothing wrong with my cognitive function, that I'm not experiencing any significant memory impairment or confusion beyond what's normal for my age. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned determination. With all due respect to Dr. Winters, he said carefully, one evaluation isn't definitive, and memory issues can be intermittent. You might be having a good day today, but that doesn't erase the concerns we've— The money, Daniel, I cut in, unwilling to let him redirect the conversation. I want it returned to my accounts, all of it, by tomorrow. He exhaled slowly, adopting the patient expression I had seen so often lately. Mom, that's not possible. The transfers are part of a larger financial restructuring. For your benefit. To protect you. From what? The only threat to my financial security is sitting right in front of me. His expression hardened. The pretense of patience slipping. That's unfair, and frankly, a little paranoid. This hostile attitude is exactly why we needed to secure your assets before you made impulsive decisions out of confusion. Impulsive decisions like what? Spending my own money, updating my will, reducing your inheritance. Daniel stood abruptly. I think you're too upset to have a productive conversation right now. We can discuss this tomorrow when you're calmer. Rebecca and I are only trying to help you. As he moved toward the door, I remained seated, my voice following him. If the money isn't back in my accounts by noon tomorrow, my next call will be to the police. He paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me with an expression I had never seen before, cold, calculating, almost contemptuous. Do what you think is best, Mom, but remember, filing a false police report is a crime, and given your documented cognitive issues, I'm not sure anyone would take such accusations seriously. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving me alone with the full understanding of what I was facing. My son hadn't just taken my money. He had systematically undermined my credibility, my autonomy, and my identity. Any action I might take would be filtered through the narrative he had carefully constructed. A confused elderly woman making unfounded accusations against the devoted son who was only trying to protect her. I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, the weight of this betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt truly alone. Cut off from my financial resources, my family support system, and even my own sense of self. But something else was stirring beneath the shock and hurt, a slow-burning anger, a steely determination that had carried me through widowhood, single parenthood, and decades of professional challenges. Evelyn Mercer had never been a victim, and I wasn't about to start now. I reached for the folder Marilyn had given me at the bank and the card from Dr. Winters. It was time to fight back, not just for my money, but for my dignity, my independence, and my future. What I set in motion that night would shock everyone who thought they knew me, especially my son, who had gravely underestimated the woman who had raised him. Maxwell Grant's office was located in a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, its dignified exterior maintaining the historical character of downtown Mapleton, while brass plaques beside the door identified the legal practices within. The receptionist, a woman approximately my age with a warm smile and efficient manner, showed me to a comfortable office where Maxwell Grant awaited. I had expected someone older, given his reputation in elder law, but Mr. Grant appeared to be in his early 40s, tall and lean with prematurely silver hair and alert brown eyes behind stylish glasses. He rose to greet me, his handshake firm. Mrs. Mercer, please have a seat. Dr. Winters spoke highly of you. She mentioned your situation. Involves financial exploitation by a family member? My son, I confirmed, settling into the chair across from his desk. He's transferred all of my assets, approximately $347,000, into accounts I can't access. after months of convincing me and others that I'm experiencing cognitive decline. If Mr. Grant was surprised by my directness, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and removed a legal pad from his desk drawer. Let's start from the beginning. When did you first notice concerning behavior from your son regarding your finances? For the next hour, I outlined the situation, referring to my notes and documentation. Mr. Grant asked precise, sometimes uncomfortable questions, probing the timeline and challenging potential inconsistencies. Not because he doubted me, I realized, but because he was anticipating how my story would be questioned if we proceeded legally. This is, unfortunately, a textbook case of elder financial exploitation, he said when I finished. The gradual isolation, the manufactured evidence of cognitive impairment, the strategic involvement of medical professionals, the incremental assumption of financial control. Your son executed this with concerning precision. He's always been methodical, I said, a hollow ache spreading in my chest as I recognized the skills I had once admired in Daniel. His attention to detail, his careful planning, now weaponized against me. Mrs. Mercer, I believe we have grounds for both civil and criminal complaints. The civil action would focus on recovering your assets, while the criminal complaint would address the fraudulent activity and potential charges of elder abuse. Before we discuss options further, I need to ask, what is your desired outcome here? The question gave me pause. What did I want? The answer seemed obvious. My money returned, my independence restored. But there were complications, emotional entanglements that couldn't be neatly resolved through legal proceedings. I want my assets returned, of course, I began slowly. But beyond that, I'm not certain. Daniel is still my son. His children are my grandchildren. The idea of him facing criminal charges. Mr. Grant nodded, his expression softening slightly. Family financial exploitation cases are always complex. The perpetrator isn't a stranger you can simply cut from your life. They're someone with whom you have deep, often lifelong connections. Someone you may, despite everything, still love. Yes, I admitted, grateful for his understanding. Here's what I suggest. We pursue a two-track approach. Track 1 focuses on asset recovery through civil means, demand letters, court filings, if necessary, potentially a temporary freeze on the accounts where your money was transferred. Track 2 involves building a criminal case but holding it in reserve. The threat of criminal charges often provides powerful leverage in resolving the civil matters quickly. And if the civil approach doesn't work, then we reevaluate. But in my experience, someone like your son, professional, respected in the community, no prior criminal history, will go to great lengths to avoid the public exposure and potential consequences of criminal charges. The strategy made sense. It offered a path to recovery while keeping open the possibility of reconciliation, however distant that might seem at present. There's one more thing, Mr. Grant added, his tone shifting slightly. Given that your son has been actively building a case regarding your cognitive capacity, I recommend we obtain a comprehensive geriatric assessment, more extensive than your visit with Dr. Winters. This would establish beyond doubt your capacity to make financial and legal decisions. I agreed, and by the end of our meeting, we had outlined immediate next steps. The geriatric assessment, formal demand letters to Daniel and the financial institutions holding my transferred assets, and preliminary civil filings to be prepared, but held until we saw the response to our demands. As I prepared to leave, Mr. Grant offered one final piece of advice. Mrs. Mercer, document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text message, every interaction with your key, son or anyone else involved, and be prepared. Once we send the demand letters, the dynamics will shift dramatically. Your son will likely escalate his efforts to control the narrative. How right he would prove to be. Driving home from Mr. Grant's office, I took a route that passed landmarks from our family history. the elementary school where Daniel had once played the lead in the fifth-grade production of Charlotte's Web, the ice cream parlor where we'd celebrated his high school graduation, the community park where he'd taught Lily to ride a bicycle while I watched proudly from a nearby bench. Each location held memories of the son I thought I knew, the boy who had clung to me after his father's funeral, the teenager who had worked weekends to help with household expenses, the young father who had once seemed so determined to make me proud. Where had that son gone? Had he ever truly existed, or had I been projecting my own values onto a person who had always been more calculating than I wanted to admit? The relationship between mothers and sons is complex, built on decades of intimate history, unspoken expectations, and evolving power dynamics. Daniel had been 10 when Thomas died, old enough to remember his father, but young enough that the majority of his life had been shaped by my single parenthood, by watching me work multiple jobs, make sacrifices, and ultimately succeed despite the challenges. I had always believed he admired my strength, my resilience. Now I wondered if he had instead learned to see it as a threat, a standard against which he measured himself and found lacking. Had my independence made him insecure? Had my financial prudence made him resentful? Had my continuing capability into my 70s somehow disturbed his notion of the natural order, of children eventually assuming authority over their aging parents? These questions haunted me as I returned to my condo, where the answering machine blinked with 4 new messages, all from Daniel, each more insistent than the last. I listened without responding, noting the progression from concern to frustration to thinly veiled threats. "Mom, I'm worried about you. Please call me back." "Mom, we need to discuss what happened yesterday. Call me as soon as you get this." "Mom, I've spoken with Dr. Larson. He's very concerned about these symptoms of paranoia. We may need to consider a more supervised living arrangement if this continues." "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. I'm coming over tonight at 7. We need to have a serious discussion about your care going forward." The final message sent a chill through me. Supervised living arrangement was a euphemism for assisted living, potentially memory care, given the narrative Daniel had been constructing. Was this his next move? To have me declared incompetent and placed in a facility where I would have even less autonomy, less ability to challenge his control of my finances? I called Carolyn immediately, outlining the meeting with Mr. Grant and Daniel's escalating messages. "You can't be there when he comes tonight," she said firmly. "He's escalating because he's losing control of the situation. You need to be somewhere safe while the legal process begins." "I'm not hiding from my own son," I protested, though the idea of facing Daniel alone that evening did cause a flutter of anxiety. "It's not hiding, Mom. It's strategic withdrawal. If he's talking about supervised living arrangements, you need to take that seriously. In some states, he could potentially force a psychiatric evaluation if he convinces enough people you're a danger to yourself." The thought was chilling. "What do you suggest? Is Eleanor still in Mapleton? Your friend from the hospital?" Eleanor Blackwood had been my closest colleague at Pinecrest, a nursing director who had become a dear friend. We still met monthly for lunch, though I hadn't confided in her about the situation with Daniel. "Yes, she's still here. Call her. See if you can stay there for a few days while the initial legal steps are happening. Don't tell Daniel where you are. Just that you're taking some time to yourself." The suggestion made sense, though the idea of imposing on Eleanor felt uncomfortable. Still, she had often said her house was too large since her husband's passing, that she welcomed company to fill the quiet rooms, and she lived in Ridgeview Estates, a gated community where Daniel couldn't simply show up unannounced. Eleanor answered. On the second ring, her familiar voice immediately soothing. "Evie, what a lovely surprise. I was just thinking about you yesterday." When I explained that I needed a place to stay for a few days due to some maintenance issues at my condo, she didn't hesitate. "Of course you'll stay here. I've been telling you that guest suite is yours whenever you want it. Come as soon as you can. I'll make up the bed and we can have dinner together. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Eleanor. I'll explain everything when I arrive. And if my son calls looking for me, would you mind? None of my business where you are or what you're doing, she finished for me, her tone shifting to one of concern. Evie, are you in some kind of trouble? Do you need more than just a place to stay? I'll explain everything tonight, I promised. But yes, I could use a friend right now. After packing enough clothes for several days, along with my documentation and notes, I called a taxi rather than taking my own car. Another suggestion from Carolyn, who pointed out that Daniel might look for my vehicle at Eleanor's if he became concerned about my whereabouts. As the taxi pulled away from Lakeview Gardens, I caught sight of Daniel's car turning into the complex entrance. The timing had been close, too close for comfort. Now safely en route to Eleanor's, I sent a brief text message to my son. Daniel, I'm taking some time to myself to think about our recent conversations. I'm safe and staying with a friend. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk further. His response came almost immediately. Mom, this is exactly the kind of erratic behavior that concerns me. Where are you? Who are you with? I'm at your condo now and it looks like you packed in a hurry. I didn't respond, turning off my phone entirely, as the taxi wound through the tree-lined streets toward Ridgeview Estates. For the first time in months, I was taking decisive action without seeking Daniel's approval or fearing his judgment, a small but significant reclamation of my independence. What I couldn't have anticipated was how aggressively Daniel would respond to this challenge to his control, or how quickly the situation would escalate beyond anything I had imagined. Eleanor's sprawling ranch-style home felt like a sanctuary as she welcomed me with a warm hug and concerned eyes. True to her professional background as a nursing director, she asked no questions until I was settled in the guest suite with a cup of chamomile tea, my suitcase unpacked, my nerves slightly calmed. Now, she said, settling into an armchair across from me in her sunlit living room. Tell me what's really happening, Evie. And don't give me that nonsense about condo maintenance. I hadn't planned to share the full story, just enough to explain my unexpected visit and request for discretion. But in Eleanor's calm, non-judgmental presence, the entire narrative spilled out. Daniel's gradual campaign to convince me and others of my cognitive decline, the financial manipulation, the discovery at the bank, my meeting with the attorney, and Daniel's increasingly concerning messages about supervised living arrangements. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to outrage as my story unfolded. When I finished, she reached across to grasp my hand firmly. Evie Mercer, I've known you for 30 years. I've seen you manage hospital crises, staff shortages, and budget cuts without breaking a sweat. You've always been one of the sharpest minds I know, and nothing I've seen in our recent interactions suggests that's changed one bit. She squeezed my hand for emphasis. I believe every word you've told me. And you can stay here as long as you need to sort this out. The validation from someone who had known me professionally and personally for decades brought tears to my eyes. After months of having my perceptions questioned, my memories dismissed, and my capabilities doubted, Eleanor's straightforward acceptance felt like oxygen after too long underwater. Thank you, I managed, wiping away tears. I was starting to wonder if I was crazy after all. That's gaslighting for you, Eleanor said grimly. It makes you doubt your own reality, and it's particularly effective when it comes from someone you love and trust. She paused, her expression thoughtful. You know, this explains some things that seemed odd to me recently. What do you mean? About 2 months ago, I ran into Daniel at Walgreens. We chatted briefly, and he mentioned how worried he was about you, said you'd been getting confused, forgetting important appointments, misplacing things. He asked if I'd noticed any changes during our lunches. My stomach tightened. What did you tell him? That you seemed exactly the same as always, sharp as a tack and more organized than people half your age. She shook her head. I thought he was just being an overprotective son. I never imagined he was systematically building a case against your competence. This was a new piece of information. Daniel had been approaching my friends directly, seeking to recruit them into his narrative. I wondered how many other acquaintances he had spoken to, how widely he had spread his concerns about my supposed decline. Did he contact you again after that? I asked. No, but I did get an odd call from Rebecca about 3 weeks ago. She invited me to join some support group for friends and family of people experiencing memory issues. Said you were too proud to admit you needed help, and they were trying to build a network of support. I declined. Told her I had enough on my plate with my volunteer work at the hospital. Another tactic I hadn't been aware of, a support group that would further legitimize their claims about my condition while isolating me from friends who might challenge the narrative. The scope of their campaign was broader and more strategic than I had realized. That evening, after a simple dinner that reminded me how nice it was to share a meal with a friend who wasn't scrutinizing my every movement for signs of confusion, I turned my phone back on to check messages. The screen immediately lit up with notifications. 8 missed calls from Daniel, 3 from Rebecca, 5 voicemails, and a dozen text messages ranging from concerned to angry. The final text message made my blood run cold. Mom, your behavior is increasingly concerning. We've filed a missing person report with the police since you've disappeared from your home in a confused state. If you see this, please contact me or the authorities immediately. He filed a missing person report? Eleanor exclaimed, reading over my shoulder. After you explicitly told him you were taking time away and staying with a friend? I nodded, a sense of dread building. It's an escalation. I've challenged his control by leaving, by not answering his calls, by taking independent action. Now he's involving the authorities, establishing an official record of my erratic behavior. We should call the police department, Eleanor suggested. Clear this up immediately. I'll vouch that you're here voluntarily and of sound mind. That seemed like the logical step, but something held me back. An instinct honed through decades of hospital crisis management. Let's call Maxwell first, I decided, referring to my attorney. I want to understand the legal implications before we do anything. Despite the late hour, Mr. Grant answered my call, his voice alert as I explained the situation. This is actually a positive development from a legal standpoint, he said after considering the facts. By filing a missing person report when he knows you're not missing, your son has created an official record of false statements to authorities. So what should I do? Call the police department's non-emergency line. Identify yourself, explain that you've learned a missing person report was filed, and clarify that you are safe and voluntarily staying with a friend. Keep it simple. Don't elaborate on the financial situation or make accusations against your son. Then send your son a text message clearly stating that you've contacted the police to clear up the misunderstanding about your being missing. Won't that just anger him further? I asked, concerned about escalation. Possibly, but it establishes a paper trail of your rational, appropriate responses to his increasingly inappropriate actions. Document everything. Screenshots of the text messages, notes about when you called the police and who you spoke with. This all becomes evidence of your competence and his overreaction. I followed his advice, first calling the police to clarify that I was safe and voluntarily staying with a friend, then sending a calm, clear text to Daniel. Daniel, I've been informed that you filed a missing person report. I've contacted the police department to let them know I am safe and voluntarily staying with a friend, as I told you in my earlier message. I'm disappointed that you've taken this unnecessary step. That wastes police resources. His response came almost immediately. Mom, we've been worried sick. Your behavior is extremely concerning. Disappearing without telling anyone where you're going, turning off your phone. This isn't like you. Dr. Larson agrees these could be signs of a serious cognitive issue. We need to get you evaluated properly. I showed the message to Eleanor, who shook her head in disbelief. Notice how he completely ignores the fact that you did tell him you were staying with a friend? How he's rewriting reality to fit his narrative? She was right. Daniel wasn't acknowledging my actual communications. He was creating an alternative version of events where I had disappeared without telling anyone. And he was once again invoking Dr. Larson's authority to legitimize his concerns. I composed a final message for the night. I did not disappear. I told you I was taking time to myself and staying with a friend. I am safe and well. I will be in touch when I'm ready to discuss matters further. After sending it, I blocked his number. Temporarily, just for the night. I needed uninterrupted rest before what promised to be a challenging day ahead. Eleanor, ever practical, had additional security measures in mind. I've let the gate attendant know not to admit Daniel or Rebecca without checking with me first, she informed me. And I've asked my neighbor Walt, the retired police officer, to keep an eye out for any unusual activity around the house. Sleep came fitfully that night. My dreams filled with fragmented images of Daniel as a child, reaching for my hand with complete trust, juxtaposed against his adult face wearing that cold, calculating expression I had glimpsed when he left my condo after our confrontation. The morning brought new developments. Mr. Grant called early, his tone urgent. Mrs. Mercer, I've just been informed that your son has filed for emergency guardianship, citing concerns about your cognitive capacity, and claiming you're a danger to yourself. The words hit me like a physical blow. Guardianship would give Daniel legal control over my personal decisions, my living arrangements, my medical care, a far more comprehensive authority than merely controlling my finances. How is that possible? He can't just declare me incompetent. My voice rose with indignation and fear. He needs to convince a judge, and will obviously contest it vigorously, Mr. Grant assured me. But the initial hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. This is moving quickly, which suggests he may have been planning this move for some time. What do we need to do? First, we'll file our opposition to the guardianship petition immediately. Second, I want you to see Dr. Winters again today if possible. We need the most current evaluation of your cognitive function on record. And third, we need to accelerate our civil complaint regarding the financial exploitation. The judge should see the full picture, that this guardianship petition may be a tactical move to maintain control of your assets rather than a genuine concern for your welfare. My hands trembled as I ended the call. Emergency guardianship. The words echoed in my mind, representing a level of control I had never imagined Daniel would pursue. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my fundamental rights as an individual, my autonomy, my dignity. Eleanor found me sitting motionless in the guest room, the phone still clutched in my hand. Evie? What's happened? When I explained, her face flushed with anger. That's outrageous. As if you of all people need a guardian. What can I do to help? Would you come to the hearing tomorrow? Your perspective as a healthcare professional, who's known me for decades, could be valuable. Try to keep me away, she declared fiercely. And I'm calling Marianne Jenkins right now. She was the hospital legal counsel when we worked together. She specializes in healthcare law and might have insights about fighting this guardianship nonsense. Eleanor's unwavering support steadied me, helping transform my shock into determination. Daniel had escalated matters beyond financial manipulation into an attempt to legally strip me of my independence. But in doing so, he had made a critical miscalculation. He thought I was isolated, vulnerable, and without resources. He thought I would crumble under pressure, retreat into confusion and self-doubt. He thought the mother who had raised him single-handedly, managed a hospital department, and navigated countless crises would simply surrender her autonomy without a fight. He was about to discover how profoundly wrong he was. The morning of the guardianship hearing dawned crisp and clear, a beautiful October day that belied the emotional storm I was about to face. Eleanor drove me to the courthouse. her steady presence beside me a reminder that I wasn't as alone as Daniel had tried to make me feel. We arrived an hour early at Mr. Grant's request, meeting him in a small conference room where he briefed me on what to expect. "The burden of proof is on Daniel to demonstrate that you lack capacity," he explained, straightening his already immaculate tie. "Judge Harriet Chen is presiding. She's fair but conservative in guardianship matters. She'll want to hear directly from you, Mrs. Mercer." "Will Daniel be there?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Yes, along with his attorney, Patricia Whelan. She specializes in elder law from the other side of the equation." His diplomatic phrasing didn't disguise his distaste. "They'll likely have Dr. Larson testify about his concerns regarding your cognitive function." "The doctor I've only seen twice, both times with Daniel present," I noted bitterly. "Exactly. But we have Dr. Winter's comprehensive evaluation from yesterday, and she'll testify in person. Eleanor's statement as a healthcare professional with decades of history with you will be valuable. And we also have written statements from 3 of your former colleagues at the hospital." The door opened, and a young woman with a tablet entered. "Mr. Grant, they're ready for you in courtroom C." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate, which somehow made it more intimidating. As we entered, I saw Daniel and Rebecca sitting at a table on the left side, both dressed impeccably in conservative business attire. Their attorney, a polished woman in her 50s with a severe bob and pearl earrings, leaned toward them, whispering something that made Daniel nod seriously. When Daniel looked up and saw me, his expression shifted momentarily. Surprise, perhaps, at seeing me composed and professional in my navy pantsuit rather than confused and disheveled as his narrative required. I held his gaze steadily until he looked away first, turning to whisper something to Rebecca. Judge Chen entered, a compact woman with silver-streaked hair and rectangular glasses that she peered over as she surveyed the room. After the formalities, Ms. Whelan presented Daniel's petition, her voice modulated to convey both authority and concern. "Your Honor, Daniel Mercer is seeking temporary emergency guardianship of his mother, Evelyn Mercer, due to rapidly deteriorating cognitive function that has resulted in erratic behavior, financial mismanagement, and potential danger to herself. Over the past 6 months, Mrs. Mercer has exhibited increasing confusion, memory lapses, and most recently disappeared from her home without notification, causing sufficient concern that a missing persons report was filed with authorities." I watched Judge Chen's expression carefully as Ms. Whelan continued, outlining a version of me I didn't recognize. A confused elderly woman making alarming financial decisions, forgetting important appointments, becoming paranoid and hostile when family members expressed concern. Dr. Edward Larson, Mrs. Mercer's primary physician, has documented these cognitive concerns in her medical record and supports the need for guardianship, Ms. Whelan concluded. "We've also submitted affidavits from Mrs. Mercer's son and daughter-in-law detailing specific incidents of confusion and concerning behavior." Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Mr. Grant. "Counselor, your response?" Maxwell rose, his tall frame and confident bearing drawing all eyes. "Your Honor, we vigorously contest this guardianship petition, which we assert is not a good faith effort to protect Mrs. Mercer, but rather an attempt to maintain control over financial assets that her son has already improperly transferred out of her accounts. Mrs. Mercer is fully competent, as demonstrated by a comprehensive neurological evaluation conducted just yesterday by Dr. Helen Winters, a respected neurologist who has known Mrs. Mercer professionally for over 20 years. Strode forward, submitting Dr. Winters' evaluation to the court. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have filed a separate civil complaint regarding the unauthorized transfer of approximately $347,000 from Mrs. Mercer's accounts by her son. Transfers made after a systematic campaign to create the appearance of cognitive decline." I could see Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his attorney placing a warning hand on his arm. "Mrs. Mercer has not disappeared, as alleged. She informed her son via text message that she was staying with a friend and needed time to think. She also promptly contacted police when she learned a missing persons report had been filed, clarifying that she was safe and had voluntarily chosen to stay elsewhere. These are the actions of a rational, competent individual responding to a distressing situation. The discovery that her life savings had been transferred without her informed consent. For the next hour, both sides presented evidence. Dr. Larson testified about his concerns regarding my cognitive function, though under Mr. Grant's skilled cross-examination, was forced to admit that he had conducted no formal cognitive assessments and had observed me only in appointments where Daniel was present and frequently answered questions directed at me. Dr. Winters's testimony was clear and unequivocal. My cognitive function was consistent with normal aging, with no impairments that would affect my capacity to make financial or healthcare decisions. Her professional stature and detailed evaluation seemed to make an impression on Judge Chen, who asked several thoughtful follow-up questions. When Eleanor testified about our 30-year professional relationship and her recent interactions with me, she also revealed Daniel's attempts to recruit her into his narrative about my supposed decline, information that visibly surprised the judge. Finally, it was my turn to speak. As I took the stand and was sworn in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was my opportunity to reclaim my voice, my story, my autonomy. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Chen addressed me directly. I'd like to hear from you about these concerns your son has raised. I met her gaze steadily. Your Honor, I am not experiencing cognitive decline beyond what's normal for someone my age. What I am experiencing is the systematic gaslighting and financial exploitation by my son, whom I trusted implicitly. From there, I outlined the events of the past 6 months, the gradual escalation of Daniel's comments about my memory, the strategic appointments with Dr. Larson where Daniel dominated the conversations, the careful building of a narrative about my confusion, and finally, the discovery that my accounts had been emptied. When I confronted Daniel about the transfers, he claimed we had discussed it, that I had forgotten these conversations due to my supposed confusion. When I obtained a neurological evaluation showing no significant impairment, his story shifted. When I stated my intention to recover my assets legally, he escalated to this guardianship petition. My voice remained steady despite the emotion behind my words. Your Honor, this is not about protection. It's about control. Throughout my testimony, I noticed Judge Chen watching me carefully, not just listening to my words, but observing my demeanor, my clarity of thought, my emotional regulation. When she asked detailed questions about my finances before Daniel's intervention, I was able to provide precise information about my accounts, investment strategies, and retirement planning. And what would you like to see happen now, Mrs. Mercer? She asked finally. I want my financial independence restored. I want the authority to make my own decisions, financial, medical, and personal. And I want the opportunity to rebuild trust with my son, if that's possible, but on terms that respect my autonomy and dignity. Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully, then called a 30-minute recess to consider her decision. As we waited in the conference room, Mr. Grant expressed cautious optimism. You were compelling and clear, he said. Judge Chen was paying close attention to your cognitive function during your testimony, your ability to recall details, maintain focus, process complex questions. You demonstrated capacity through your performance. Eleanor squeezed my hand. You were magnificent, Evie. Absolutely magnificent. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Chen didn't keep us waiting long. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, I find the petition for emergency guardianship to be unwarranted. Mrs. Mercer has demonstrated clear capacity to make her own decisions, and the neurological evaluation by Dr. Winters supports this finding. She looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Mercer, the court has serious concerns about the financial transactions that have occurred and the methods used to justify them. While those matters will be addressed in the civil complaint that has been filed, I strongly encourage you to voluntarily return control of those assets to your mother immediately. Relief washed over me as Judge Chen continued, addressing me directly. Mrs. Mercer, you have the court's full recognition of your capacity to manage your own affairs. This ruling explicitly confirms your right to make your own financial, medical, and personal decisions without interference. As we rose when the judge departed, I caught Daniel's eye across the courtroom. His face was flushed with anger or embarrassment. Perhaps both. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who would refuse to admit he was wrong even when caught red-handed. Then his attorney was whispering urgently in his ear, and the moment passed. Outside the courtroom, Mr. Grant was already discussing next steps for the civil case, but my attention was captured by the approach of Rebecca, her expression strained as she walked hesitantly toward me. "Evelyn," she began, using my first name in a way she rarely did. "I think we need to talk." I studied Rebecca's face, trying to discern her intent. In the decade since she'd married Daniel, our relationship had been cordial but distant. She'd always seemed slightly intimidated by me, perhaps because Daniel spoke of me as the family matriarch, the hospital administrator who never made mistakes. "I think we need to talk too," I agreed, nodding to Mr. Grant that it was all right. "Eleanor, would you mind giving us a moment?" Eleanor squeezed my arm supportively before moving a discreet distance away with Mr. Grant, close enough to intervene, if needed but far enough to allow privacy. Rebecca glanced nervously toward the courtroom doors. "Not here. Daniel is still with Ms. Whelan. Could we go to the cafe across the street?" 10 minutes later, we sat at a corner table in courthouse grounds, steaming cups of coffee between us. Rebecca fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger in the nervous habit I'd observed whenever she felt uncomfortable. "I want you to know that I didn't understand the full extent of what was happening," she began, her voice low. "Daniel told me you were having memory problems, that he was consolidating your finances to protect you from making mistakes or being scammed." I sipped my coffee, waiting for her to continue rather than jumping to respond. Hospital administration had taught me the value of strategic silence. People will fill the void with information if you let them. "I believed him at first," she continued, eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "The way he described it, you paying bills twice, forgetting appointments, getting confused about dates, it sounded concerning. And then he started showing me these pictures on his phone. Pictures of me looking confused or disoriented," I supplied. She nodded. "He'd catch you mid-blink or just waking up from a nap. Or he'd take photos after deliberately confusing you by changing plans without telling you clearly." My suspicions confirmed, I felt a strange mix of vindication and deeper hurt. "When did you start to realize what was really happening?" Rebecca's eyes finally met mine. "About 3 weeks ago, I overheard Daniel on the phone with Jason, his financial advisor. They were discussing investment options for the newly acquired capital. Daniel was talking about using your money for an expansion of our real estate business, not setting up a protective trust like he'd told me." She took a shaky breath. "When I confronted him, he said it was just temporary, that of course he'd set up the trust eventually. But there was this amazing opportunity that would benefit everyone, including you. He said he'd pay you back with interest." "But he didn't tell me any of this," I said evenly. "He didn't ask my permission. He told me I had agreed to it and then forgotten." "I know," she whispered. After that conversation, I started paying more attention. I noticed how he would rearrange things in your condo and then question you about them later. How he would tell you one thing and then claim he'd said something entirely different. At first, I thought maybe he was right about your memory, but then I saw him delete a text message from your phone while you were in the kitchen, making tea. A reminder about Sophie's recital date that he'd sent you that morning. After he deleted it, he acted surprised when you didn't show up, told everyone you had forgotten." Her eyes filled with tears. That's when I knew for certain, but I didn't know what to do. We've overextended ourselves financially with the business. Expansion. Daniel took out loans using projections that included your money as capital. If he had to return it all immediately... I processed this new information carefully. Financial desperation rather than simple greed might explain, though certainly not excuse, Daniel's actions. It aligned with the increasing lavishness of their lifestyle over the past year. The new luxury SUV, the kitchen renovation, Lily's expensive private school. Are you here as Daniel's emissary? I asked directly. To plead for leniency or time? Rebecca shook her head firmly. No, he doesn't know I'm talking to you. I'm here because... She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Because the girls adore you. Because despite everything, I respect you enormously. And because what Daniel has done is wrong. To his mother, to his children who deserve an ethical example, and to me as his partner who was pulled into this deception. She reached into her purse and removed a flash drive, placing it on the table. Between us. This contains screenshots of text conversations between Daniel and Jason discussing the use of your money. Bank records Daniel printed showing where the funds were transferred. Photos I found on his phone showing how he was deliberately creating situations to make you appear confused. She pushed it toward me. I don't know if this helps your legal case, but it's the right thing to do. I stared at the small device, representing both betrayal and unexpected alliance. Daniel will know you did this. Yes, she acknowledged quietly. I've already rented a small apartment and enrolled the girls in the public school near my sister's house. I told Daniel last night that I can't continue in the marriage unless he makes full restitution to you and gets counseling. The girls? I murmured, my heart contracting at the thought of Lily and Sophie caught in this painful adult conflict. They're confused and upset, Rebecca admitted. They know something serious is happening, but not the details. They've been asking for you. Daniel told them you were sick and needed rest, but they don't quite believe it. A new wave of anger washed over me. Daniel using my grandchildren's love for me as another manipulation tactic, potentially damaging their sense of trust and security. I'd like to see them, I said, to reassure them that I'm fine and that none of this is their fault. I'd like that too, Rebecca agreed. They're staying with my sister after school today. Perhaps you could visit. It would mean so much to them. As our conversation concluded, I found myself reevaluating Rebecca, no longer seeing her as Daniel's passive accomplice, but as someone who, when confronted with the truth, had chosen the harder, more ethical path. She was protecting her daughters, while trying to salvage what integrity remained in a situation rapidly spinning out of control. We parted at the cafe entrance, Rebecca heading back to the courthouse to meet Daniel while I rejoined Eleanor and Mr. Grant, who had been waiting, patiently at a nearby bench that seemed intense, Eleanor observed as I approached. I handed the flash drive to Mr. Grant. Rebecca just provided evidence documenting Daniel's financial scheme and his deliberate efforts to make me appear cognitively impaired. She's leaving him, at least, temporarily. His eyebrows rose as he pocketed the drive. This could significantly strengthen our civil case. I believe it will, I agreed. And I'll be visiting my granddaughters this afternoon. They need reassurance that their grandmother hasn't abandoned them. That afternoon, I sat on a porch swing at Rebecca's sister Jenna's modest suburban home, a granddaughter tucked under, each arm as we gently swayed back and forth. Sophie, always the more demonstrative, had launched herself at me the moment I arrived, wrapping her arms around my waist with such force I nearly lost my balance. Lily, at 12 beginning to affect the casual coolness of early adolescence, had held back initially before joining our embrace with equal intensity. "Grandma, are you mad at Daddy?" Sophie asked, her 9-year-old directness cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Is that why you went away?" "I'm upset about some grown-up things that happened between your father and me," I answered carefully. "But that has absolutely nothing to do with you girls. I love you both exactly the same as always." Dad said you were confused and needed special doctors, Lily stated, her analytical mind clearly trying to reconcile conflicting narratives. But you don't seem confused to me. I'm not confused, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. Sometimes adults disagree about important things, and right now, your dad and I have a serious disagreement that other adults are helping us resolve. Like a judge? Lily asked perceptively. Mom came home crying yesterday and said something about court. I exchanged glances with Rebecca, who stood nearby, giving us space while remaining within earshot. Yes, like a judge, I confirmed. The judge helped clarify some things today, and now we're working on fixing the problem. Will you come back to Sunday dinners? Sophie asked plaintively. Dad said you were too sick, but I miss your special. Macaroni and cheese. I miss making it for you, I said, kissing the top of her head. I can't promise about Sunday dinners just yet, but I promise I'll see you regularly, no matter what happens between the grown-ups. As the girls gradually relaxed, accepting my presence and reassurance, we shifted to lighter topics. Lily's science. Project on ecosystems. Sophie's upcoming role as a tree in the school play. It has 3 whole lines, Grandma. The new kittens Jenna's cat had recently delivered. Later, as the girls helped Jenna prepare dinner, Rebecca joined me on the porch swing. Thank you for coming, she said softly. They've been so worried about you. They're resilient, I observed. But they need stability and honesty now more than ever. I agree. She hesitated. Evelyn, regardless of what happens with the legal proceedings or with Daniel and me, I want you to remain a constant in the girls' lives. They need their grandmother. The simple statement, acknowledging my place in my granddaughters' lives independent of the conflict with their father, touched me deeply. In all the legal maneuvering and emotional turmoil, the girls' well-being had remained my central concern. I'd like that very much, I replied. As I prepared to leave, promising the girls I'd return soon, Lily pressed a folded paper into my hand. I made this for you in art class, she explained. Don't open it until you get home, okay? Later that evening, back in Eleanor's guest room, I unfolded Lily's gift, a carefully executed watercolor painting of 4 figures holding hands. A tall girl, a smaller girl, a woman, and an older woman with silver hair. Beneath it, in Lily's neat handwriting, our family doesn't have to live in the same house to still be a family. The wisdom of children, I thought, tracing the painted figures with my fingertip. Even in the midst of conflict and change, Lily had distilled an essential truth that the adults in her life would do well to remember. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Opening it, I read, Mrs. Mercer, this is Patricia Whelan, Daniel's attorney. Following today's hearing and after extensive discussion with my client, we would like to propose a settlement meeting regarding the civil matter of your financial assets. Please have Mr. Grant contact me at his earliest convenience if you're amenable. I forwarded the message to Mr. Grant with a simple note. It appears Daniel is ready to negotiate. The legal battle was far from over, but for the first time since discovering the emptied accounts, I felt the momentum shifting in my favor. Whatever came next, I would face it with newfound clarity about who I was and what truly mattered. The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Mr. Grant's office, neutral territory that gave me a psychological advantage. In the days leading up to it, Mr. Grant methodically reviewed the evidence Rebecca had provided on the flash drive, building what he called an airtight case of financial exploitation. The texts between Daniel and his financial advisor are particularly damning, he explained during our preparation session. They explicitly discuss using your funds for business expansion, with repeated references to the fact that you weren't aware of the full plan. So he knew exactly what he was doing, I said, the confirmation both vindicating and painful. Without question, and with Ms. Whelan reaching out about settlement, it's clear they recognize the strength of our position, especially after the guardianship petition failed so definitively. I nodded, appreciating his directness. What do you think they'll offer? My guess, a structured repayment plan rather than immediate full restitution. Daniel likely doesn't have liquid access to the full amount anymore if he's invested it in business expansion, as the evidence suggests. Mr. Grant leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Mercer, I need to ask, what's your primary objective here? Full financial recovery? Criminal prosecution? Family reconciliation? The question made me pause. What did I want? In the immediate aftermath of discovering the theft, I'd wanted justice, perhaps even retribution for the months of gaslighting and manipulation. But now, with some distance and perspective, my priorities had evolved. I want financial independence restored, I said slowly. I want acknowledgement of what was done to me. And I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I want the possibility of eventually rebuilding some kind of relationship with my son, though I recognize that may take considerable time. Mr. Grant nodded, making notes. So you'd prioritize financial recovery and acknowledgement of wrongdoing over criminal prosecution? Yes, though I'm not taking criminal charges entirely off the table. That would depend on Daniel's approach to making amends. That gives us a clear negotiating framework. I'll handle the legal and financial aspects, but I suggest you prepare to address the personal dimension directly with Daniel, if you feel ready for that. The question lingered with me throughout the weekend. Was I ready to face Daniel, not just in the adversarial context of a courtroom, but in the more intimate setting of a settlement discussion? Could I separate the son I had raised and loved from the man who had systematically undermined my autonomy and stolen my financial security? Of course you're not ready, Eleanor declared when I shared these thoughts during our Saturday morning coffee ritual. How could anyone be ready for such a conversation? But readiness isn't the point, Evie. The point is that you're strong enough to have it anyway. When Monday arrived, I dressed with particular care. A tailored charcoal pantsuit that had served me well during hospital board meetings, pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 15th anniversary, comfortable but professional low heels. My armor, in a sense, for one of the most difficult encounters of my life. Mr. Grant met me in the lobby of his building, escorting me to the conference room where Eleanor was already waiting. They haven't arrived yet, he noted, checking his eye. Watch. We'll begin precisely at 10, whether they're here or not. At 9:58, Ms. Whelan arrived alone, her confident stride faltering slightly when she saw our assembled team. Good morning, she said, arranging her materials at the opposite side of the conference table. My client is parking. He'll join us momentarily. True to her word, Daniel entered at exactly 10 die, his usual impeccable appearance slightly diminished by shadows under his eyes and a tie that didn't quite match his shirt, small details that spoke volumes about his current state of mind. His gaze met mine briefly before sliding away, focusing instead on arranging his papers and water glass. With meticulous precision, Mr. Grant opened the meeting with clinical efficiency. We're here to discuss settlement of the civil complaint filed by Mrs. Evelyn Mercer regarding the unauthorized transfer of approximately $347,000 from her accounts by her son, Daniel Mercer. Before we begin, I want to be clear that we have substantial documentary evidence of these transfers, their unauthorized nature, and the deliberate campaign to create the appearance of cognitive decline in Mrs. Mercer to justify them. Ms. Whelan maintained her professional composure. My client acknowledges the transfers occurred but disputes the characterization of them as unauthorized. However, in the interest of family harmony and Mr. Mercer's genuine concern for his mother's welfare, we're prepared to offer a structured resolution. She outlined their proposal: full restitution of the transferred funds, but on a payment schedule extending over 5 years, with a significant initial payment followed by monthly installments. Mr. Grant's response was immediate and firm. That timeline is unacceptable. Mrs. Mercer requires full access to her retirement funds now, not 5 years from now when she's 76. The unauthorized nature of these transfers is not in dispute given the evidence in our possession, including communications between Mr. Mercer and his financial advisor explicitly acknowledging Mrs. Mercer was not fully informed. I watched Daniel's face as Mr. Grant referenced the text messages, noting how his expression shifted from confidence to alarm. He leaned toward Ms. Whelan, whispering urgently. After a brief consultation, Ms. Whelan adjusted their position. We can accelerate the timeline to 18 months, with half the amount returned immediately and the remainder in monthly payments. The negotiation continued in this vein for nearly an hour. Offers and counteroffers, legal terminology and financial details flowing across the table, while I observed silently, trusting Mr. Grant to advocate for my interests, while I focused on understanding Daniel's demeanor and motivations. What struck me most was that not once during this extensive discussion of my money did Daniel directly address me or even maintain eye contact for more than a fleeting moment. It was as if I had been reduced to an abstraction, a legal problem, to be resolved rather than his mother, the woman who had raised him. When Mr. Grant called for a brief recess to discuss their latest offer privately with me, Ms. Whelan and Daniel stepped out, leaving me with Mr. Grant and Eleanor. They're moving in the right direction, Mr. Grant assessed. The current offer returns 75% immediately, with the remainder over 6 months. That's substantially better than where we started. It's not just about the money, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Throughout this entire negotiation, Daniel hasn't spoken directly to me, hasn't acknowledged what he did beyond the sterile language of disputed transfers. If we're truly seeking resolution, that has to change. Mr. Grant considered this. You want a personal acknowledgement. I want my son to look me in the eye and take responsibility for what he's done. Not just financially, but for the months of making me doubt my own mind, for the betrayal of trust, for using my grandchildren as pawns. I took a steadying breath. Before we finalize any financial agreement, I need to speak with Daniel directly. When negotiations resumed, I took control of the conversation before Mr. Grant could respond to Ms. Whelan's latest offer. I'd like to speak with my son privately, I stated, my voice calm but resolute. Ms. Whelan looked startled. Mrs. Mercer, in settlement negotiations, it's customary for legal counsel to— This isn't just a legal settlement, I interrupted. This is a family matter. Before I agree to any financial arrangement, I need 10 minutes alone with Daniel. Daniel finally looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded. It's fine, Patricia. I'll speak with my mother. The others filed out reluctantly, leaving Daniel and me facing each other across the polished conference table, a physical barrier that seemed to symbolize the emotional chasm between us. The silence stretched, thickened. I let it grow, watching Daniel's discomfort increase until finally he spoke. The financial offer is very fair, he began, falling back on business language as a shield. You'll have access to most of your money immediately, and the remainder— Why? Daniel? I asked simply. He faltered, the practiced explanation dying on his lips. Why what? Why did you steal from me? Why did you try to make me believe I was losing my mind? Why did you tell my grandchildren I was sick? Why did you betray everything I thought we meant to each other? His eyes dropped to his hands, which were clasped so tightly the knuckles had whitened. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. What way was it supposed to happen? I pressed. Was there a version of this story where taking your mother's life savings without her knowledge was acceptable? You don't understand, he said, a flash of the old defensiveness surfacing. The business was in trouble. We overextended on the Westridge development, and when the zoning approval fell through, we were facing bankruptcy. I needed capital immediately to secure the Riverside project, which would stabilize everything. And you didn't think to simply ask me for help? He laughed bitterly. Would you have given me that much? Risked your entire retirement on a real estate venture? Probably not, I acknowledged. because it wasn't my risk to take. But I would have listened. I might have helped with a more reasonable amount. Instead, you decided to take everything. I was going to pay it back, he insisted. With interest. You would have ended up with more than you started with. If the venture succeeded, I pointed out. If it failed, I would have been left with nothing at 71 years old. He had no response to that, the reality of the risk he had imposed on me without consent finally registering in his expression. The money is one thing, Daniel. The systematic campaign to undermine my confidence, to make me doubt my own mind, to isolate me from my friends and family, that's something else entirely. Do you understand what you did to me? For the first time, I saw genuine shame flicker across his features. It started small, he said quietly, just suggesting you were becoming forgetful to explain when you questioned financial documents I asked you to sign. But then it escalated. Each step seemed necessary to maintain the story. I never intended what? To have me declared legally incompetent? To put me in a facility where I'd have no ability to challenge your control of my assets? Because that's where this was heading, Daniel. That was the logical conclusion of the path you chose. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze, and in that moment, I saw something beneath the polished professional facade he presented to the world. The frightened boy who had responded to his father's sudden death by developing a desperate need for control, for certainty, for security that couldn't be suddenly snatched away. I'm not asking you to understand or forgive what I did, he said finally. I just want to resolve this without destroying what's left of our family. Rebecca's already left. The girls are confused and upset. My business reputation is in jeopardy. I studied my son's face, the face I had loved since the moment the doctor placed him in my arms 39 years ago. I saw the man he had become, with all his flaws and failures, but also glimpsed the child he had been and perhaps, in some ways, still was. Here's what I need from you, Daniel, I said carefully. Full financial restitution, yes. That's non-negotiable. But beyond that, I need genuine acknowledgement of what you did and the harm it caused. Not just to me, but to your daughters, who deserved better than to be used as pawns in this manipulation. And I need you to get professional help to understand why you did this and ensure it never happens again. And if I do those things? He asked, his voice barely audible. Then maybe, eventually, we can begin to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not what we had before, that's gone. But something new that's built on truth rather than manipulation. Something that respects my autonomy and your accountability. When the others returned, they found us sitting in silence, the air between us, thick with unspoken emotions but somehow clearer than before. The final settlement was reached quickly after that. Full financial restitution within 30 days, with substantial penalties for any delay. A written acknowledgement of the unauthorized nature of the transfers, and no criminal charges filed, conditional upon full compliance with the settlement terms. As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, Daniel approached me hesitantly. "Mom?" he began, then faltered. I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging whatever he wanted to say. "I'm starting therapy next week," he said finally. Rebecca made it a condition of any possible reconciliation, but I think I need it anyway, to understand why He couldn't finish the sentence. "That's a good first step," I said simply. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't reconciliation. That would take much longer if it ever came. But it was acknowledgement, a small crack in the wall of justification and denial he had built around his actions. And for today, that was enough to begin moving forward. 3 months after the settlement meeting, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment in Willow Springs, watching the movers position my grandmother's cherry wood dining table beneath the window that overlooked the community garden. The February sunlight streamed through bare branches, casting intricate shadows across the polished surface, where so many family dinners had once been shared. "Is that centered enough, Mrs. Mercer?" the younger mover asked, wiping his brow. "Perfect," I confirmed, tipping them generously when they finished. "Thank you for your care with everything." After they left, I moved slowly through the rooms, reacquainting myself with beloved possessions that had been in storage during my 3-month stay in Eleanor's guest suite. Thomas's reading chair, now positioned beside the living room window. The watercolor landscapes I'd painted during my Thursday classes. Photo albums and books that contained a lifetime of memories. Each item represented a piece of myself reclaimed, my identity reassembled in this new space that was entirely my own. The settlement had been honored exactly as agreed. My financial assets returned within 30 days, allowing me to secure this comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Willow Springs, a vibrant senior community that offered independence with optional social activities and support services. Unlike Lakeview Gardens, with its isolated location and limited amenities, Willow Springs was centrally located near shops, medical facilities, and a community college where I'd already enrolled in a creative writing course. My phone chimed with a text message from Carolyn. "Landed safely. Should be at your new place by 4. Can't wait to see it. Love you, Mom." My daughter had flown in from Phoenix for the housewarming dinner I'd planned for this evening. A small gathering to mark this new chapter. Eleanor would be there, of course, along with Dr. Winters and Marianne Jenkins, who had provided valuable legal insights during the guardianship challenge. Rebecca would bring Lily and Sophie after school, though she had politely declined to stay for dinner herself, understanding that her presence might create tension with the final guest I had invited, Daniel. Our relationship remained fragile, tentative, like newly formed ice on a pond that might either strengthen or shatter with each careful step. The weekly therapy sessions he had promised to attend had become twice weekly at his own request. We had begun with supervised visits with the girls at Rebecca's sister's home, progressing recently to occasional coffee meetings, just the two of us, at a cafe halfway between his temporary apartment and my new home. These encounters were often awkward, punctuated by long silences and careful navigation around difficult topics. But there were also moments, brief, fleeting, when I glimpsed something authentic emerging from beneath the polished persona he had cultivated for so long. A flash of genuine remorse when he spoke of the girls, a vulnerable admission about his fear of failure when the real estate development began collapsing. Small truths, tentatively offered. The doorbell interrupted my reflections. Expecting the flower delivery I'd ordered, I was surprised to find Rebecca standing there, holding a potted peace lily. "I know I'm early," she said, smiling tentatively. "The school had a half-day I forgot about, and the girls are bouncing off. The walls with excitement about seeing your new place." Behind her, Lily and Sophie waited impatiently, each clutching handmade cards and barely containing their energy. "Grandma!" Sophie burst forward as I opened the door wider, wrapping her arms around my waist. "We brought you cards and Mom got you a plant, and I learned how to make cookies at Aunt Jenna's so I can help with dessert." Lily approached more sedately but with equal enthusiasm, surveying the apartment with approval. "This is way nicer than the condo," she declared, "and you can walk to the library from here." That was a major selling point, I agreed, touched by her recognition of what would matter to me. "Would you girls like the grand tour?" As they explored excitedly, Rebecca and I settled in the kitchen where I had been preparing for the evening's dinner. "Daniel texted to confirm he's coming," she said, arranging the peace lily on the windowsill. "He seems nervous." "It's a big step," I acknowledged. "The first time we've all been together since everything happened?" Rebecca nodded, understanding the complexity beneath the simple statement. "The girls are excited to see him." "It's been 2 weeks since his last weekend visit. How are those going?" I asked carefully, not wanting to overstep, but genuinely concerned about my granddaughter's well-being. "Better," she said thoughtfully. "The therapist suggested activities that require collaboration rather than just entertaining them, so they've been building this elaborate model railway together. It's good for them to see him fully engaged, not just performing fun dad routines. The insight revealed how deeply Rebecca had been considering the patterns in their family dynamics, working to create healthier interactions rather than simply surviving the aftermath of the separation. "And you?" I asked. "How are you doing with all of this?" She smiled wryly. "Taking it one day at a time. The legal separation gave me space to think about what I really want, not just for the girls, but for myself. I've started teaching real estate classes at the community college. Turns out I enjoy the educational side of the business more than the high-pressure sales Daniel focused on." Before I could respond, Sophie bounded back into the kitchen. "Grandma, you have a craft room. Can we make something before everyone else comes?" The next few hours dissolved into pleasant activity, helping the girls create simple welcome signs for the dinner guests, finishing the food preparation, Carolyn's arrival with enthusiastic hugs and exclamations over the apartment. The comfortable chaos of family life filled the new space, beginning the process of creating fresh memories untainted by recent traumas. As evening approached, the doorbell rang again. Through the peephole, I could see Daniel standing stiffly in the hallway, clutching a gift bag, and looking more uncertain than I'd seen him since he was a teenager preparing for his first job interview. I opened the door, greeting him with deliberate warmth. "I'm glad you could come." His eyes moved past me to where Lily and Sophie were arranging flowers on the dining table, their heads bent together in concentration. "Thank you for inviting me," he said quietly. "This means a lot." The initial moments were awkward. Conversation stilted as everyone navigated this new configuration of our fractured family. Eleanor, bless her, stepped in with well-timed questions and observations that gradually eased the tension, while Dr. Winters engaged Daniel in a surprisingly comfortable discussion about a renovation project at Pinecrest Medical Center. Midway through dinner, as I served the main course, I caught Daniel watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately interpret. When our eyes met, he didn't look away as he once would have. "Mom, this is really good," he said, indicating the roast he'd always favored. "I'd forgotten how much I missed your cooking." The simple compliment, ordinary in any other context, felt significant. An acknowledgement of the nurturing I had provided throughout his life. A value placed on something I had given freely. "Thank you," I replied. Some skills don't fade with age. The subtle reference to our previous conflict hung briefly in the air before Carolyn smoothly redirected the conversation to Sophie's upcoming school play. Yet something had shifted, a small step toward authentic interaction rather than performative politeness. After dinner, as others helped clear the table, Daniel approached me in the kitchen, speaking softly so only I could hear. I brought you something." He handed me the gift bag he'd arrived with. "It's not much, but..." Inside was a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover and an elegant fountain pen. Tucked inside the journal was an envelope containing a registration confirmation for a week-long memoir writing retreat at a nearby arts center. "The writing class was Rebecca's suggestion," he explained awkwardly. "She mentioned you'd talked about wanting to record your life experiences, especially the hospital administration years. And I remembered how you always wrote everything down when we were kids. Observations, quotes, ideas." The thoughtfulness of the gift, recognizing an aspect of myself I had set aside during years focused on others' needs, touched me deeply. It wasn't an expensive gesture designed to impress or obligate. It was a recognition of who I was beyond my role as mother and grandmother. "Thank you, Daniel," I said sincerely. "This is perfect." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and only Carolyn remained, helping with the final cleanup, she observed, "That went better than I expected." "Yes," I agreed, storing leftover food in the refrigerator that was gradually filling, with the rhythms of my new daily life. "It's a beginning." "Are you really going to that writing retreat?" she asked. "It actually sounds wonderful." "I am," I confirmed. It's time I told my own story. And that's what I've been doing these past months, recording not just the painful recent history but the full arc of my life. The young widow finding her way forward, the dedicated hospital administrator, the mother making countless small sacrifices, the grandmother discovering new aspects of herself in what society often dismisses as the twilight years. The legal aftermath continues to unfold. Daniel adhered to the financial settlement exactly as agreed, though the business partnership with Jason ultimately dissolved amid recriminations when the Riverside project struggled. Rebecca filed for divorce 2 months after our dinner, a decision Daniel accepted with surprising composure, focusing instead on establishing a consistent co-parenting arrangement that prioritized the girls' stability. My relationship with Daniel remains a work in progress, wounded trust healing slowly, new boundaries established and respected, moments of connection interspersed with painful reminders of betrayal. I don't know if we'll ever fully restore what was broken, but we're building something different now, something based on more honest recognition of each other as flawed, complex individuals, rather than the simplified roles of devoted mother and dutiful son. As for me at 71, I've discovered that starting over isn't just a possibility, it's an opportunity. My watercolor class at Willow Springs has introduced me to a circle of new friends with similar interests. The memoir writing workshop unlocked creative aspirations I'd long neglected. I volunteer at the hospital auxiliary only when it truly interests me, rather than from obligation. Last month, I even accepted dinner with Walter Isaacson, the retired cardiac surgeon who lives down the hall and shares my fondness for classical music. Financial security remains important. I monitor my accounts vigilantly and have established legal protections that even Daniel doesn't know about. But beyond the practical considerations, I've recognized a deeper truth. The most valuable asset I reclaimed wasn't my money, but my sense of self, my confidence in my own perceptions, my right to direct my own life without apology or explanation. Standing. Now at my apartment window, watching the sunrise gild the awakening community garden, I think about the journal entry I wrote last night. I never thought I'd be starting over at 71, but here I am. The path that brought me here was painful, but the view from this vantage point is unexpectedly beautiful. Each morning brings new possibilities, and for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I'm fully present in my own story. Not as supporting character in someone else's drama, but as the protagonist of my own unfolding narrative. There's freedom in that realization, and purpose, and a quiet kind of joy that belongs entirely to me. I close the journal, running my fingers over my embossed initials. The morning light catches the simple silver bracelet on my wrist, a gift from Eleanor, inscribed with words that have become my personal mantra. Your story, your terms, your voice. And that voice, after decades of putting others first, after months of having my reality questioned, after rebuilding from betrayal, is finally speaking its truth. Not just about what was lost, but about what has been found in the aftermath. Resilience, clarity, and the precious discovery that it's never too late to reclaim your power, your purpose, and your peace. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.